What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. The Pokemon games introduce new creatures every single generation. One of the biggest fan-favorite generations to date has been the second generation, and their remakes. And that's not just because you get to go to a second region in the games. Johto was the first time we learned that new Pokemon could be introduced in new games, and they give us some really new and interesting ones, some even being able to rival some of the best from the games that came before them. However, there seems to be a prevailing trend in the Johto region, where there are a large number of one-off Pokemon that aren't related to any others. And while this is in no way exclusive to the Johto region, it seems to be most noticeable here. They address this somewhat in later generations by adding connections to Johto Pokemon, which is itself a trend the Johto region started, by a significant portion of the Pokédex being made up of relations to previous Pokemon. This feature proved to be a mixed bag by providing some fantastic new additions, but also some of the more problematic Pokemon in the generation. Because despite all the great additions, the Johto region is not without its problems. So, here are the top 6 Johto Pokemon I have a problem with. Number 6, Dunsparce. Here we go. What can I say about this random assortment of parts that supposedly makes up a hover land snake thing? They claim that there's some inspiration from Quetzalcoatl here, but I can't see it, and besides, Rayquaza does it justice in a far better manner. I just don't understand. If it's got wings, surely it could fly, right? Nope. Instead it uses its tail to burrow into the ground, because that makes sense. This, again, seems to suffer from the too many cooks in the kitchen syndrome. With the wings, a drill for a tail, it can't even open its eyes, stripes that may or may not be its internal organs, and apparently the things that I thought were teeth all these years are just its bottom lip. Even its move pool seems completely random. This completely unremarkable and forgettable Pokemon just fails to leave a good impression on the Johto region. And in a generation with only 100 new Pokemon, that's not really something that you can afford. Number 5, Wobbuffet. This pick is honestly 100% motivated by the way you encounter this Pokemon in the wild. It is by far the most annoying encounter that anyone can have the misfortune of falling into. Sure, Abra can teleport away, but at least you don't die from it. And Geodude and Graveler can explode in your face, but at least you can run away from those if you want, so if you get hurt, that's on you. With Wobbuffet, you are literally incapable of escaping. Wobbuffet is one of the few Pokemon with the ability Shadow Tag, that prevents fleeing from battle. This wouldn't be so bad if Wobbuffet were like your standard Pokemon, but you see, he only has about 4 possible moves, none of which are direct attacks. That doesn't sound too bad until you remember that you're stuck, and you have no choice but to attack, and give your opponent the chance to use that power against you. You better hope and pray that Wobbuffet doesn't use the right move at the right time, or you're dead. And if you were hoping to one-shot it, you better hope it doesn't use Destiny Bond, otherwise, you're just as dead as he is. I hope you like stocking up on either potions, revives, or repels, because you're gonna need them if Wobbuffet is in the area. Number 4, Qwilfish. Odds are, a lot of you out there forgot about Qwilfish, and I don't blame you. I forget about it all the time. It's incredibly unremarkable. It's just a tiny, partially inflated fish with only a single fin in the back for movement. The color scheme doesn't really help either. To me, it would have been much more dynamic and interesting if it had started off as a smaller fish that clearly had poisonous barbs, but wasn't that big. And then it could evolve into a form that's fully inflated and has even more spikes coming off of it. As I said in the Kanto video, there were more poison types than any other type of Pokemon in the first generation. So how did the Johto region follow up on that? With a grand total of 4 new poison types. And this is one of them. Not the strongest showing for what used to be the number 1 type. And what's worse is that Qwilfish gets completely overshadowed by the already existing pair of water poison types, Tentacool and Tentacruel. Like in most Pokemon games, the most common Pokemon that you run into while surfing in the Johto region is Tentacool. But why? Did they not have faith in Qwilfish? Did they not think anyone would like it? When the game lets a Pokemon get outdone in their own region by the superior predecessor, it's clear that you abound in wasted potential. Number 3, Smeargle. One of the gimmickiest gimmick Pokemon of them all. Smeargle has the distinct honor of learning only one move, Sketch. This move can only be used once. That sounds terrible, you say? You'd be right. But wait, Sketch can permanently copy any move last used by the opponent. Well, that could be pretty good, you think? But you have no clue what move they'll be using, and it's only learned every 10 levels. So you have exactly 10 chances of hopefully getting a good move. Back to terrible? Good, because you're still right. The only way to get an amazing Smeargle with all the coolest moves you want is to painstakingly manipulate the game, either by crafting an intricate preset battle with a friend, or simply by cheating to get the results you want. If you're going to put that much time and energy into a Pokemon, at least make it worthwhile, like a shiny perfect IV Deoxys or something. There's absolutely no reason to use this Pokemon in a playthrough of a game. It's just too risky. If not, you'll just be sitting there in the grass hoping you won't have to wait 10 more levels because your opponent used Growl. Luckily, they slightly alleviated the gap between people who use this Pokemon to cheat the system by just allowing Dark Void not to work anymore. Plus, his design is so goofy looking. I'm not opposed to a paint-based Pokemon, I guess, but did he really need the hat? I'm surprised they didn't just go all out and give him a palette to hold in his other hand and a smock, just in case anyone was unclear that he paints. And surprise, he's another random one-off Pokemon without any evolutions whatsoever. I'm noticing a pattern here. Number 2, Bellossom. This Pokemon might have been fine if it were allowed to stand on its own. I don't just mean to make it another one-off, but maybe evolve from Sunflora, or give it a different starting point entirely. The answer, however, was not to have it spin off from a completely unrelated, previously established evolutionary line. Just about every part of this Pokemon is changed from every other part of the ones it's supposed to be related to. The only similarity I can see is the general shape of the arms. The skin turns green, the majority of the plants move to the bottom, the eyes completely change, and worst of all, it loses the poison typing. How could that be beneficial? If you needed the advantages of poison in your current environment to survive, how could losing it make you any more likely to succeed? It just doesn't make any sense. The only other Pokemon to just lose a type is Mega Aggron, who becomes a pure Steel type. Other Pokemon change types, of course, when they evolve, but never just drop them to become a single type. I know Politoed could be considered a similar example of this, and even though I personally think it's pretty lame, it still has a place there. Tadpoles turn into frogs, so even if I wish he weren't related, Politoed does kind of make sense. Bellossom's generic and unimpressive design makes me think that it was never intended to be related to the Oddish line, but they couldn't come up with a better place for it. If you can't think of where to put your creation, it may be best just to leave it out for the time being and come back to it when you have a fully formed plan. Number 1. Hitmontop. Hitmonlee has always been one of my favorite fighting types, and Hitmonchan is a fairly solid showing of what a fighting type should be. Once the second set of games came out, they decided to give them both a pre-evolution that could evolve into either one, which makes sense. These two have always been connected, so it's only natural that they share some sort of evolution. But then they decided to throw in a third evolution, and that wouldn't be a bad idea, except that it was a terrible idea. They had one for kicking, one for punching, so the only other body part that they could come up with to use in combat is the head? And it doesn't even really use its head. It just keeps in one spot and lets everything else flail around. And although I'm no expert in forms of martial arts, I kind of doubt there's one that's based on constantly breakdancing. And even the supposed methods that might be the basis for it are referred to as a game by the people that make it. Furthermore, in almost every language, Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan are named after someone famous for some form of martial arts. As you may have guessed, Hitmontop has no such distinction, because his fighting style is nonsense. I'm not sure why in recent generations he's finally decided to stand upright, which seems not to have affected his fighting prowess in any discernible way, so I guess he was just doing it for show. Plus, the way you get Hitmontop is absurd. All the Hitmons evolve from Tyrogue at level 20, and which one you get depends on the stats. If Tyrogue's attack is higher than his defense, it will evolve into Hitmonlee, and if its defense is higher, it will evolve into Hitmonchan. But if you want a Hitmontop, you have to have the attack and defense exactly even when it evolves. This may sound easy to people who perfectly IV breed and EV train every Pokemon they have, but for the common trainer that just wants to fill up the Pokédex, it's a bit harder. You have to rely on proteins and irons, or maybe super training in the newer generations, and just hope that the Pokemon you're fighting will give you the exact right kinds of stats you'll need, so that you can finally be rid of this burden of having to obtain this living Beyblade. And so, there you have it, my top 6 Johto Pokemon I have a problem with. What did you think about this list? Are there more standalones or more egregious evolutions that you would have put on this list? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, leave a like, share this video, and be sure to subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time.